My name is Penny Dreadful. The dawn will soon come and bring with it the unresolved troubles of another day. A man, a frightening and violent man, has disappeared, but the fear he has created has not disappeared with him. Because of his actions, the shadow of the past has reached into the present. Tonight, it will arrive, and there will be new terror at Collinwood. Welcome to Terror at Collinwood, the podcast dedicated to dark shadows. I am your hostess, Danielle Penny Dreadful Galerter, and I am so excited to bring you the show today. Unbelievable. If all goes as planned, this episode will be going up on April 18th, 2022, which is 55 years to the day when Jonathan Frid first appeared on Dark Shadows as Barnabas Collins. Episode 211, April 18th, 1967. A historic day, to be certain. But before we get into today's show, I want to let you know that there's a new Dark Shadows book out. It's called Running Home to Shadows, and it's edited by Jim Beard, who you're going to be hearing from very soon on this podcast, hopefully in the next episode, actually. And there are articles in that book by several people who have been on this podcast and people who I have reached out to be future guests in this podcast. So you'll be hearing maybe even from everybody who's in that book. It is available now on Amazon. I just got my copy in the mail. The book has a magnificent cover by the great Mark Maddox, who I've mentioned before several times in this podcast. He, of course, painted the Dark Shadows lunchbox, but he's won several Rondo Awards. He's done so many amazing covers for monster magazines. This book is out now. It is on Amazon, and it's really cool. So let's get to the show. Be careful, my friend, where you tread, for I warn you now, there are spoilers ahead. Welcome to Terror at Collinwood, and oh boy, am I excited to tell you about my guest today. Not that he needs any introduction, but he's going to get one. My guest today, David Selby, who is a prolific actor and author. He has performed extensively in film, television, and theater. Among many other roles, he played Richard Channing on Falcon Crest, Paul Reynolds in Up the Sandbox opposite Barbara Streisand, Michael Tyrone on Flamingo Road. He was Emery Jansen in Ansel Farage's Loon Lake. And to mark the 200th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birthday in 2009, Mr. Selby appeared on stage performing for Barack and Michelle Obama. He portrayed Lincoln in a scene from the play The Heavens Are Hung in Black at the historic reopening of the Ford Theater. He had a recurring role in the Marvel TV series Legion and was even the voice of Commissioner Gordon in the animated version of Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. He's been performing in Smartphone Theater's amazing online productions, including What Friends Do, #Expendables, and A Dark Shadows Christmas Carol, where he played Scrooge, and of course is beloved by Dark Shadows fans worldwide for playing that delightful immortal rogue Quentin Collins and his assorted ancestors and parallel time counterparts. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the show, David. Thank you for being here with me today.
It's my pleasure, Danielle. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, what a delight. Now, we're celebrating in this episode the 55th anniversary of Jonathan Frid's first appearance on Dark Shadows as Barnabas Collins.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes. Yeah. And when you appeared in Mary O'Leary's wonderful documentary, Dark Shadows and Beyond, the Jonathan Frid story, you spoke
wasn't that good?
It was great. And I want to thank Mary for actually setting up this interview. This is wonderful. You spoke so fondly of Jonathan, and I could sense the camaraderie that must have been present on the set for Dark Shadows, and then subsequently with appearing at the Dark Shadows festivals. Could you talk a little bit about coming into the show? Did Jonathan give you any advice when you came in? Like what was that dynamic like?
Oh my goodness. I didn't even know, to tell you the truth, when I came on to the show.
Mm-hmm.
I had never seen Dark Shadows. And I know I've said this before. I wasn't even aware of the show, but I did know Joan Bennett because I'd watched her films and everything. And so I did know a little bit about her. And then when I came onto the show and met all of the actors, oh my goodness. I mean, when you think about all of the actors, Jonathan, and but I mean, I'm I'm thinking about John, but I'm thinking also of all the others besides Joan Bennett. But there were so many others: Grayson Hall, Thayer David. I mean, there were just Louis Edmonds. It just went on and on. In fact, you mentioned something about smartphone theater, and back a couple of months ago, 3 months ago, whenever it was, we did a production of A Christmas Carol.
Yes.
And what they did, they got together. Yes. And they got all the original actors around that were around from Dark Shadows to do that production of A Christmas Carol. And how wonderful, how special it was to see everyone. And many of us, in fact, all of us have remained friends.
Yeah.
Through the years. So that was very special. And it would have been great to have Jonathan, but Jonathan, he was very special. Obviously, he was very special to the show. He, I think probably, I don't think there's any doubt, he saved the show when he came on and he created this character. And Jonathan himself, he went to Yale. He was a theater actor, and he was, had all of this training. So he was a very smart man, and not only was he smart, he was a very, very nice man. I mean, he was funny to be playing Barnabas, but he was rather. I don't know. What do you say? He didn't take stage in person. Do you know what I mean? He was unassuming. He was very easy,
right?
Very polite, very, can I say, almost gentle. And Barnabas was going to be
temporary.
This ferocious, vampire that he was. You would see some kind of humanity in Barnabas. I mean, he wouldn't just come along and bite your neck or whatever. He had a tortured soul.
Sure.
And I don't think he didn't come across as evil. The fans loved him.
Right.
So much so. That, my God, I was told then when I knew nothing about it all, but I was told that the fan mail started to come in such a volume, that they thought Barnabas was this, I don't know, not Easter Bunny, but maybe Santa Claus.
Right. It's funny.
Yeah. And it was all this, in the studio down there on West 53rd Street, they would bring all the mail in, fan mail. And I can imagine before I would even got there on the show that Dan saw the boxes of fan letters, and he knew they had something in Jonathan Frid. And it was that fan's response to Jonathan, to Jonathan, because of who he was inside of a man, and also his qualities as an actor. And it was this response that made Dan and all the writers say, oh my goodness, we have to keep him on the show if we're going to have a show. And so they went to work and built this character. But he was I don't know. You always felt to a certain extent in his reaction to the other that he was, in a way, rather than this, you think of this vampire or whatever, in a way, he became the show's hero. He was,
yeah.
It was just such a different kind of creation that he was responsible for, that he was indispensable.
Indispensable. Yeah, absolutely. And to such a degree that he was on it so much and doing these publicity tours, et cetera, that he was, they then brought your character in. And interestingly, lightning struck twice here because Quentin also became a pop culture icon and a very important part of the show as well. You had the big guns, Barnabas, Quentin, and Angelique became, it's interesting how the sort of the monster characters in the show did become the protagonists, with Jonathan Barnabas kind of leading the charge, but also with Quentin there and Angelique. Now,
Angelique, oh yes,
yeah, with Lara Parker,
yeah. You're right, and it was this. I don't know when. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Danielle. I never. When Quentin came, Barnabas, Jonathan was already established. And in fact, if anything, he even said to me a couple of times, more than a couple of times, he says, "Boy, am I glad you're here."
I love that, that there was no, sometimes you get, when you came on, you were a hit, so, and, but there was no envy or anything like that. It was, you were helping carry the load and you were part of this ensemble. And he was grateful to you too, for helping to carry the load on the show.
He was indeed. And of course, in my position, I was fortunate and that he felt that way. And I was glad to have the opportunity, because I don't know. You think of Jonathan going outside. I mean, he couldn't. He was just not. He was a different kind of vampire. He had a real heart, He was so likable. And his problems as a vampire were beyond his control, beyond his doing.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, it was, there was a sympathy that the audience felt for him. Sure.
That's right. So even when he succumbed to whatever a vampire is supposed to do, the fans still gathered around, admired him, had loved him.
Right.
No matter, because they knew, in a way, I think, when you think about the character of Maggie, the Catherine Scott character, that, I don't know, there was a kind of innocence. Is there such a thing as an innocent vampire? I don't know. But he had played other, I can see him as playing Richard III, and all of these. And you mentioned Angelique, Lara Parker, and Lara. She became the temptress, the villain in that way.
Sure.
So I remember writing about that some years later, and I talked about that. Yeah, the thing on the show was, it was so nice to have the attention of Barnabas Collins.
Right. And it's interesting because your characters followed a similar trajectory in that Quentin started out also as a villain, as a ghost. And then we see his past, and he was a rogue, a womanizer, but there was a charm to Quentin as well. And that also resonated with the audience. Despite all the bad things Quentin was doing, people liked Quentin a lot. And that also speaks to your acting ability. There was a similar dynamic that happened there. And he was cursed as a werewolf and did all these horrible things and developed a conscience. And that was an interesting parallel, I think, with what happened with Jonathan and Barnabas.
Well, for me, it was a little, in a way, at first, I didn't have to talk,
Right.
And then, the joke was, of course, it'd be like, I don't know, I've mentioned that before somewhere along the line. It'd be like the old silent movie days when you finally heard the actor's voice, you didn't care for the voice. But fortunately, when Quentin got to speak, it turned out all right,
Oh, yeah, to say the least. Yeah,
But I
definitely.
had them. You see, another thing that Quentin had going for him, and I can't emphasize this enough because of how important Bob Cobert, the
Oh,
composer,
yeah. Yes.
how important his music was to the show. Can you imagine when Quentin appeared? I mean, in hearing Quentin's theme. So he had his own theme song. How wonderful for the actor, for me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's amazing. It's amazing.
And hearing that theme come out of that old Victrola or that old,
And David, to this day, every so often, I'm in an elevator or somewhere, I'm in a place where they're playing music, and every so often you hear Quentin's theme, and I love it. I just get a big smile. Has that ever happened to you, where just randomly you heard it somewhere?
Yes, and I believe it or not. And I have laughed a few times I've heard it. I don't remember, but I distinctly remember a couple of times at least more getting on an elevator and the elevator music, there would be Quentin's theme.
Oh my goodness. That's great. It's so perfect.
Okay. But I was blessed, I was so fortunate, again, going back to Bob Cobert and the music he composed.
Sure.
And including the song that he, that Nancy Barrett and I did.
Yes. I want to dance with you. Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to dance. But Bob, it was so important. And the thematic music, when that theme song came on and the show opened up, very special.
The music, it was a character in and of itself. It was such an important part of the spirit and the feel of the show. Absolutely.
Yeah. Those waves coming in.
Yeah.
And then you anticipate, oh my God, what's going to happen here?
Absolutely.
And it was just that music, it was a very important character on the show.
Sure. David, I'd mentioned Jonathan did these big publicity tours, and you did as well. And I've seen pictures, and it really looks, it looks like the Beatles. It's just bananas how many people. And I try to convey that my uncle introduced me to Dark Shadows when I was really little. Like I don't remember a time when I didn't know what Dark Shadows was, because he was a fan and he passed that love on to me, that passion on to me for the show.
Special. Yeah.
Oh gosh, he gave me the bubble gum. The first time I ever saw Quentin was those bubble gum cards.
Cards.
Yeah, and I was looking at them, and who's this guy with the sideburns? And my uncle said, "Oh, that's Quentin. He's a werewolf." And so, but these pictures of these publicity tours, I try to convey to people, younger people that may not have been around then, that this was an extremely popular show, and your character, Jonathan's character, doing these tours and the number of people. What was that like? And did Jonathan prepare you for that when you went out on those tours?
No, not in that way. He would tell me, he says, it's actually one I did in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. I think it was called I Am an American Day Parade. I believe that. Anyway, he didn't tell me anything about it other than, I'm glad you're doing this. And it was only later I found out that he was the one who was supposed to have done that parade. He was supposed to have done the parade in Baltimore. But he had so many things on his agenda. ABC kept him running around the country doing these things. So he was delighted. But it was only later I found out. So I go to Baltimore for the American Day Parade. I'm riding in this convertible. It was, it was quite special. And all of these, people out there yelling at Quentin, and this and that. And finally, on the bandstand, there was a sort of a grandstand where you watch the parade. I had to leave. They had to take me off because there were so many people crowding around. And then it was only later I found out that actually Jonathan was supposed to have done that, but I was glad he left it to me because it gave me a chance, an opportunity to really, I don't know, get a feel for how many people, young people, I don't know, there were a lot of just of differing ages, felt about Dark Shadows, about the show. And, to have been in something that meant that kind of thing to people where they showed up like that, it was very special. And to this day, it is still very special. And I think that's why, I don't know, dear, it just brings back such a warm feeling in me that I don't know how else to express it. But I was so thankful to the creators, my fellow actors, and all of the fans. My goodness gracious, who would walk me home from the show.
and send you banana bread, as I recall.
Oh, Sara Lee banana bread.
Yeah. Are you still a fan of banana bread?
I'm still a fan of banana bread, but
Great.
Now I get it at a bake shop. Actually, I shouldn't even say this. You go to Starbucks, they have banana bread.
Oh, do they? Oh, wow.
Yeah, well, sometimes they do, yeah. But I always laugh when Anyway, it was wonderful. And yes, we got, so much so, we got so many loaves of banana bread. There was a wonderful place up near Lincoln Center that had a place where you could donate things. Yeah. And so I took them a lot of banana cakes.
Yeah. Just for those who may not know, David mentioned in I think it was like 16 magazine or Tiger Beat that he loved Sara Lee banana cake, and then endless loaves of banana bread from fans started showing up at the Dark Shadows studio. Yeah. So
that's how I remember, though. That's how I found out about the character of Quentin, that he was, I said, because the gal, Diana, she was our secretary and whatever. I come in one morning and she says, come on in here. We went into the room, and back in the corner were all these boxes. And she says, all of those boxes are filled with Quentin's fan mail. And she said, so you're going to be around for a while.
It's great. I mean, just even when you weren't speaking as Quentin, as the ghost, as the Peter Quint, character, that was really compelling. I remember as a child, you gave me terrible nightmares when I was a little kid. You and Jonathan both. I mean, I had nightmares about Quentin, appearing as a ghost, and it was scary, for a child. Were you familiar with Henry James's The Turn of the Screw prior to playing Quentin or The Innocents? Or
no, I mean, I go back to Dan Curtis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And obviously it was Dan's, creative mind, his thinking. And obviously there was the recognition by everybody there with to Henry James.
Sure.
And as you just mentioned, The Turn of the Screw, Peter Quint. And it's not too far to say Peter Quint and Quentin.
Yeah.
So Dan had been a fan of Turn of the Screw. And, if you wanted to see Collinwood as a real building, a real estate or whatever, Dark Shadows would, if that's what you wanted to see, it would disappoint because there was not the money to be able to have that kind of thing, where we were. But at the same time, the creators of that Dark Shadows world, they were able to, for those times, in that small studio on West 53rd Street, they brought forth with their creative beings. What a great show they created. And it was like, I remember saying one time years ago, I wrote a piece about it, and I remember saying it was like doing a high wire act with no net.
Was it similar to Summer Stock in some ways? Learning things very quickly and doing
very
a show?
Quickly, very, very quickly. There was always that feeling of we got to get this done. There's no time for retakes. There was no time to, worry about if somebody had walked in front of your the camera.
Sure.
And Dan would always say, forget it, ignore it. If they're looking at that, we're in trouble.
Yeah. Well, that's part of I think the spontaneity of it contributed to that frenetic lightning in a bottle energy that was happening, because it was, so on the fly like that, but it added. You mentioned, theater actors on the show. Many of the actors came from the theater, such as Jonathan, who had a great passion for theater, as we see in the documentary, but also Thayer David, Grayson Hall, Louis Edmonds, all of these great theater actors. Did you bond over that with Jonathan or with any of the other actors talking about theater while you were on the show, or you were still performing in theater, or you were getting your master's?
Yes, very much so. I mean, in fact, Jonathan kept going, and so did all of the actors. Mm-hmm. And then we ended up doing things together. A couple of us down through the years, we would be, and sometimes it would be a television thing or whatever, and there we'd be. And a lot of that, you see, I think goes back to Dan Curtis, because he was fond of actors. He, every actor, he took care of them in a way. You got billing, mm-hmm. And we were all so intertwined with each other. We depended upon each other,
like a repertory company.
Dan loved close-ups.
Yeah.
Get in close,
right.
He wanted to get in close on those faces.
Yeah. It's interesting because you played the Quentin, but then you played Quentin from 1897, who became immortal, with the Dorian Gray painting. But then you also played a parallel time version of Quentin. You played an ancestor of Quentin's who was also named Quentin, and then another parallel version of that Quentin. Was that difficult to keep track of, or did you do, because the takes, the way you play each of those Quentins is distinctly different. If you, watch, was that challenging to come up with different sort of versions of Quentin, I guess? Yes,
but in a way, they were all related.
Yeah, right.
But it was fun. It was good to, I don't know, it was just all part of it. And we were just all, I don't know, sort of excited to be doing it. And I mean, all of the different characters, the actors that came on to that show, see, and this is because of Dan Curtis and Gordon Russell, Sam Hall, they were after whatever. When you think about the kind of actors, a friend of mine just passed away. There was a service for him a week or so ago, and his name was Mitch Ryan.
Of course, yeah.
And Mitch had been on the show, and what a terrific actor.
Yeah.
And he and I had been to the same theater called the Barter Theater in Abington, Virginia. And there were so many others like Marie Wallace, Clarice Blackburn, Jim Storm.
Yeah.
But so many, they were all theater people. Dennis Patrick,
Yeah.
Lisa Richards.
Yeah.
Some of them I still see, a lot of them today. It was very special. And the fact that we went back and tried to create different personas for all of the different characters that Dan would weave in a new version or whatever. It was just very special.
David, I know you have to go, but I'm going to just ask you closing thoughts here on the 55th anniversary of Jonathan Frid's first appearance as Barnabas.
My final thoughts, Jonathan, they're not the final thoughts, because he's always going to be with me, as all of the actors that we worked together so closely during those years, during that time. And it was such a special, special time in those late 60s, 1970, but what the country was going through. And Jonathan was just a very special individual. And I'm proud that after it was all over, that all of us, we remained friends. And we had a good time. In fact, I have a letter from Jonathan written from when he was, up in Canada, talking about, well, he wasn't traveling much anymore, wasn't doing this anymore, and then we did have that opportunity to go to London together for
the Burton film.
Yeah, they had Tim's film.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it was a very special time, and I know that's why I'm talking with you, because of how wonderful it was. It's just so hard to but I can feel it. I'm walking into the studio right off the street, past Bob, the doorman at the little desk there. There was a parking lot attendant right next door. Take the elevator, go up, get off the elevator. There's Diane. I walk into the rehearsal room. We do the 8 o'clock in the morning. We do the read through of the script we're going to do that day. We block it out right there. And after a while, we walk downstairs to block it out for the cameras. Everybody, cast, crew, writers, producers, the secretaries, Bob the doorman, everybody. It was so special. And then after the day was finished, you'd walk outside and there would be a group of loyal fans waiting. Many came, not every day, but a lot of days, most days, just to say hello, how are you? And, Danielle, it was a very, very special time. And some of it had to do with, obviously, with the times we were going through, all of the trials and tribulations New York City was going through, the country going through, the political assassinations that we had with Kennedy, Martin Luther. Anyway, it brings a lot of, I don't know. I don't want to get emotional, Daniel. So I'm going to leave it at that, okay. Except that I can truly say I have never had better friendships in my life than the friendships that were made doing that show. And the fans picked up on it. We had no idea, but how special it was to have been a part of something like that.
And to this day, it still resonates. Your fans are still here, and we appreciate everything that everyone who contributed to Dark Shadows, including yourself, brought to us to entertain us and to provide that escape, that sort of. Jonathan Frid used to call Dark Shadows a dark brigadoon, and I think that's a great description for it. And that's just to this day, I still works in that way.
Yeah, so. I was in brigadoon.
Were you really? Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Anyway, as a young, very young actor. Anyway, and it doesn't mean that we all don't want to go on. We continue working.
Sure.
Doing other things and this and that, but. How blessed I think we were to have that come into our lives. Still, we can hold it to our hearts, and all of the people who I'm talking about, fans and everybody. It touched us all.
And hey, next year is the 55th anniversary of Quentin's first appearance, so perhaps we can revisit.
Perhaps we'll revisit. I'll do a couple of original reading things from Dark Shadows.
Oh, that would be amazing. All right. Well, David, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I really appreciate it. And I know the fans are going to really love hearing from you. So thank you very much.
Remember, Daniel, as an old friend of mine, dear Jason Robart's a wonderful actor. Dear Jason would say, "What's cut won't flop." So don't hesitate to just, he's going on and on too much. Cut that. Eliminate that.
Everything you said was great, but I will tighten it up a little bit. I'll probably
I'd
clean it up.
appreciate it. I appreciate that.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much to the legendary David Selby for taking the time to talk with me today in celebration of Jonathan Frid's 55th anniversary of his first appearance as Barnabas Collins on Dark Shadows. And now for segment number 2, I am joined by 3 wonderful individuals: producer, director, Mary O'Leary, who is back here visiting me on the podcast again, and it's great to have her back. I'm also joined by writer and actress Nancy Kersey, and also by copywriter and video producer director Will McKinley, all of whom have worked side by side with Jonathan Frid. So welcome, the 3 of you, to the show. It's great having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle.
Oh gosh, my pleasure. I heard the 3 of you a few years back on the Collinsport Historical Society podcast. It was the Clunes reunion, as I recall, and that was a lot of fun to listen to that. And it was great hearing the 3 of you reminisce about your experiences with Jonathan Frid. And I'm glad to have you here for this 55th anniversary of Barnabas's first appearance on the show. This is fun. So before we dive into some of this, there are a couple of things I want to touch on. Would you each, starting Mary, Nancy, and Will, tell us a little bit about what each of you did in terms of working with Jonathan Frid. I know, Mary, we delved into this in your episode when you were on, but if you would just recap for those who may not have caught that one, that would be great.
Thank you. I met Jonathan in April of 1985. That evening, Will McKinley was also there. He basically had been thinking about doing a one-man show, and he didn't know how he would ever get it marketed, sold, get it before an audience. So when I started working with him, at first it was developing the script, but then it was about contacting colleges, universities, Performing Arts Center about booking the show. And so I was in charge of all the booking. So basically doing, what would you say, general management work. Jonathan and I formalized our association in September 1986, and we became business partners under the banner of Clunes Associates. And that was the umbrella through which he toured his shows. So basically, I was handling all aspects of, once you've got a booking, they need the press kit, talking about the technical needs, which are pretty simple, but telling them exactly what they needed to have, what he would bring with him, all aspects of getting a show on the road.
And what about you, Nancy?
Well, I had met Jonathan before I went to his apartment. I was invited to his apartment to watch him rehearse in 1986. I had written a review of his one-man show that was in progress, in development the year before, that I saw at a festival. So based on that, when he read it, he wanted me to meet me, met him. Mary and Jonathan eventually asked me to come work for them as a writer. It was twofold. One, I would help Mary write the promotional materials and the direct contact letters to get bookings. And 2, I would help Jonathan with the material that he was developing for the one-man show. My job primarily was to write segues between the pieces that he would do and write some original material, which I did primarily for his second show that he did, Ridiculousness. Mm-hmm. And that's how I got involved. So I worked with Jonathan a lot, but I also worked with Mary.
And what about you, Will?
So even though I'm the junior member of this trio, in some ways I am the senior member, because I knew Jonathan, in fact, years before Mary and Nancy did. I started watching the show in 1982 in syndicated reruns on WNBC in New York, and got involved with the fan group. And we all together decided to plan the first East Coast Dark Shadows convention in 1983. And Jonathan got involved, and he basically became part of our planning committee. So I met him actually just around this time of year in 1983. I was 14 years old. We were at a cafe in Queens. He walked in. I had been contributing to the fanzine, and he walked in, and I was the first person that sort of saw him and stood up, and he said to me, you must be Billy, which was my name, because I was 14 years old. I was a little boy. And he said, you're an excellent writer. And I was 14 years old. Nobody had called me a writer before, and certainly not Barnabas Collins from Dark Shadows. And he made good on that pronouncement. And over the next number of years, he gave me a number of writing assignments that nobody my age would have had any business, even considering. And then, a couple of years later, when he decided to really be serious about pursuing the one-man shows, he got a letter from Mary, and he had already worked with me in a number of capacities. So he invited me to be part of that, and the three of us hit it off. And then I basically became, in our little trio, I was sort of like the researcher. I would, after school and on weekends, I would go to the libraries, try and find stories and poems and stuff.
Before Google.
Before Google. I was Google. I was like with books and all.
Yeah.
And I would like pitch him. These would be pitch sessions. I'd be like, all right, what do you think of this? Yeah. And, I'd sort of like explain a story, bring him a copy of it, tell him why I thought it was good. And then if it made it into the show, that would be like a little, feather in my cap.
Now, before I want to talk a little bit about your experiences with Dark Shadows and also with Jonathan as a person, but also, as fans of the show too. But before I do that, I also want to congratulate Mary here, because she, of course, directed Dark Shadows and Beyond, the Jonathan Frid story, which we talked to her about in an earlier episode. And the documentary is just raking in these awards, Mary. So, wow, congratulations to you. Well deserved, I might add.
Thank you, Danielle.
Absolutely.
Mary actually had to build an extension onto her apartment to fit all of the awards. Which I think is great.
Just don't put them in the east wing of your apartment, because they might end up in parallel time. Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna list them all, but there's so many. The Something Wicked DocuFest, which I love. That's great. Award winner, Best Feature Documentary. Award winner, Best of Festival. We have the Bright International Film Festival in London. Best Narrative Documentary. Award winner, Crown Point International Film Festival. Best Editing. Indie Eye Film Awards. Award winner, Best Documentary Feature. So many awards. I mean, the list just goes on and on with all of these awards, official selections, award winners. How are you feeling, Mary? You must be feeling pretty good here with all these awards you're getting.
Yes, it is very nice to receive accolades. I really, really want as many people as possible to see the documentary. And I found this as an outlet to get more people to know about it, see it, hopefully also get some local press promotion that would, again, let people know, I have that documentary to watch. Because in this day and age, there's so many options to watch of series and movies and specials and documentaries on many, many different streaming services. So it's hard to get noticed. So I saw this as a way, as a promotional vehicle to, as I say, get more people to watch the documentary.
And I hope all fans will watch this documentary. I mean, if you're a Dark Shadows fan, you gotta watch this documentary. It's amazing. I mean, if you're listening to this and you haven't watched this, it's available on many different platforms. You can get it on Amazon, of course, but there are lots of different ways you can watch this, right, Mary?
Yes, it originally started on Amazon Prime and Apple TV. It's both still available there. It's also on other channels such as Voodoo Fandango, YouTube, Vimeo, but most recently Tubi, which is a station service that's free with ads. The other ones you rent for a small fee, but many fans have told me they're excited about it being on Tubi.
And speaking of Tubi, people keep telling me to mention this, and I've mentioned it a few times, but sometimes I forget. You can watch all of Dark Shadows on Tubi with ads for free. You can watch the entire series. So if you're just getting into Dark Shadows, or you're curious about watching Dark Shadows, or you want to revisit it, it is all there, every single episode. So I know, Mary, you talked about, your how you first discovered Dark Shadows. Will mentioned a bit here about that. Nancy, now I know you've posted. I remember liking your posts a lot in the Dark Shadows forums years ago, I guess in the early 2000s. And you'd always I loved how you'd always kind of set the record straight about things and put the facts out there. It was always like really great to read your posts. I just remember this one in particular where somebody was like, there was this one person who was adamantly arguing that Dark Shadows was campy, and you just kind of like you just basically dismantled whatever argument they had, and I was like, you go, Nancy. So were you a fan of Dark Shadows before you worked with Jonathan Frid?
I saw his first episode live back. Wow. Yeah, I remember it mainly because at the time I was really into vampires as a little girl. We lived in a haunted house.
Oh, wow.
So I was very interested in the supernatural. And with Barnabas, when I saw him during a commercial break, I ran upstairs. My mother was taking a nap. I ran upstairs and said, Mom, there's another vampire besides Bela Lugosi. She didn't care. But anyway, I was very excited and started watching the show. And Jonathan Frid made me want to go into the theater.
Wow.
And I became very interested in the vocal arts. I did quite a bit of that before I even met him. I bought records at the performers reading poetry and so on. And so when it came to be that he was going to do Reader's Theater, I was rejoicing because I thought that's where he should be, definitely. But I was a big fan. I was one of those who I didn't have to run home. I was bussed home. So I would run up the driveway to see the show. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Yes, but I was one of the ones that saw it live back in the day.
No, it's great that you gave me that segue because you saw the first episode where Jonathan Frid appeared, episode 211, April 18th, 1967. So I'd like to ask the three of you, what were your impressions upon first watching episode 211 when you saw it for the first time versus watching it later on, like maybe after knowing Jonathan and working with Jonathan, looking at it through that lens? Didn't working and knowing Jonathan alter your perception of that episode, or you get more insight into it based on your conversations with him? Anything like that? So starting with Will, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so let me take a step back to answer this, because not only is this the anniversary of Jonathan's debut on Dark Shadows, it's also the anniversary of the first time I saw it, because it was the same week. It was April 12th, 1982.
Oh, okay.
That it premiered. And also, by the way, April 2nd is also the anniversary of Marion and me sitting down with Jonathan in his apartment for the first time. So,
wow.
And it's the anniversary of the final episode. So this month is April is like magic month for me and for Dark Shadows and Jonathan. But, I'm a little bit unique in that I had seen the movie first, because when I was little, I was a big horror fan like you. My father, I listened to the episode where you talked about your uncle, sharing the old horror movies with you, which was great. And I totally related to that because my father did that for me. And he said around Halloween, oh, there's a movie on Channel 9 and it's based on there used to be this soap opera about vampires, and it was on a long time ago, but I think you'd like it. So I watched it and I was completely hooked on this movie. I just thought it was the best movie I'd ever seen in my life. So when about a year or so later, when I saw an ad announcing that the show was coming on, WNBC in New York in syndication, I was shocked because I just, never thought that they would rerun a soap opera. It was unheard of. And I was a big soap opera fan. I think at the height, my mother and I recorded 6 hours a day of soap operas. And
wow.
I would watch them at night, fast forwarding through the commercials, including Mary's show, The Guiding Light. And so, but I loved the movie, and I loved the Barnabas of the movie, and I loved the pace of the movie, and I loved the style of the movie. So when I watched that first episode of Dark Shadows, I was baffled by how was this show so popular? I was clueless because it was the first 2 episodes is basically, pretty much sort of just talking. We don't, see Jonathan until the end of the episode. They took like about an hour and a half of TV time to get through the first 5 minutes of the movie. And, the unique charms of Dark Shadows, the cameras are bouncing around. There's, the boom shadows and flubbed lines. And so it took me a little bit of time to acclimate to this version of Dark Shadows as compared to the feature film. Mm-hmm. And what sold me on it was Jonathan. I mean, the minute he came on and the minute he started, particularly the 3rd episode of the syndication package, the one where he does the, what's called the soliloquy to the portrait of Josette, he was just special. And the show hooked me. I found it at the right time in my life, and it became a huge thing in my life. And when I met Jonathan, I always tried my love for Dark Shadows, my identity as a fan of Dark Shadows was always very important to me and remains very important to me. So I wanted to maintain that. Mm-hmm. And in my interactions with Jonathan, although we worked very closely and we got along great and, we're very cordial and would argue and, we're very honest with each other, I always tried, I didn't consider him a friend in part because I didn't necessarily want to consider him a friend. I wanted to be able to maintain the magic of this character and this performance. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to diffuse that by being his drinking buddy or whatever. So, so that really was the nature of our relationship. He was a mentor. Certainly he was a mentor, probably outside of my father, the most significant male influence in my life. Mm-hmm. But I always tried to hold on to that sort of me being the scared little kid who watched House of Dark Shadows for the first time when he was 11 years old.
Yeah. And I've talked to other fans who've, become friends with the actors or have been close with the actors in various capacities. And it's interesting. They do sort of still maintain that love for the show as their sort of, their favorite show and escapism and all of this. And they kind of keep that its own thing, so it sounds like that's a similar situation for you as well.
I mean, it is. And it's the first time we all went to his apartment for a meeting, mm-hmm. I was wearing a Barnabas Collins button and he looked at me and he was like, "Are you wearing a Barnabas Collins button?" And I was like, "Yes." And he was like, "Don't do that." Don't come into my apartment with a picture of my face on your shirt. And I was like, all right, well, that I'm 14, good to learn that,
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, he's going to love it. I have a button.
You were being very fanboy and he was kind of drawing the line there. Okay. Yeah. That's hilarious. How about you, Nancy? You talked about, you caught that episode in its first airing and then kind of going back to that later on after having worked with Jonathan. Did your perception of that episode or of the show in general change at all?
No, my experience is completely opposite of Will's. Mm-hmm. I'm not an awestruck person. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying Will is, but I'm not.
Only by you, Nancy.
I know, unlike me. And I don't. An actor and a performance, because I went into the theater and because I saw actors all the time that I grew up with and became friendly with and so on. And I had done that as early as in, the early 80s before I met Jonathan. What they had done before, after the first handshake, they weren't that anymore to me. They were performers. They were people. Mm-hmm. And Jonathan frankly liked the fact that I was irreverent to him, that I was not in awe of him, that I would say things and I would tease him, because fans tended to not do that. They were like, oh my God, you can't do that. In fact, fans complained to other fans when they heard me do that, but tease him. And I would say, you're not all that, Frid. and he would laugh. Mm-hmm. And he liked it. So it didn't affect me. We didn't talk about Dark Shadows together. I mean, I don't ever wear a Barnabas Collins t-shirt ever. And it's not because I have something against it. I just don't. It's just not something way I express my fanship. I don't do that. I just don't. I don't even know why. I just don't. Later on, though, when I went back to the show and when I was looking at it the other day, I remember him telling a story when he came into the house for the first time with Mrs. Johnson and said, and stood next to the portrait and said, if you would, you may tell her that it's Barnabas Collins.
Yeah.
He told a story at a festival where that clip was shown that he was aggravated with himself afterwards because he went in and he just looked at the portrait. Instead of saying, oh, my God, there's a portrait of me right here. He just looked at it, smirked, and that was it. And he said, I wish I had done more in that moment. And he did tell me later when he was doing some of the monologues that he did, especially about Josette being lifeless and bloodless, the bottom of the cliff, that he had his, I think his maid or a neighbor helping with that they would sit and he would go over the monologue and they would help him with the lines.
Oh, wow.
He would sit and help him with it. So things like that. And I can tell now, going back and looking at the earlier episodes, pretty much what's going on. If when you see somebody rehearse and perform hundreds and hundreds of times, maybe even 1,000 times, and you know that they don't feel well or they're aggravated with something, sometimes that'll blend into it and other people won't see it. But I could see in that early episode, he was terrified, absolutely terrified. That first episode, so nervous.
So the information he gave, the behind the scenes sort of stuff, helped to sort of inform your rewatching of those episodes. Very interesting. He loved to rehearse too with the other actors. I've heard several times other actors from Dark Shadows mention that he would want to get together with them to run lines, and he would record himself and doing the different voices.
Right. Well, he had hired me to do that with him when he did Arsenic and Old Lace.
Oh, wow.
And then later when he did Mass Appeal, I helped him with lines. And he had a very specific way that he did that. He would talk into a tape. He would have me talk. He would record it, and then he would mouth it because he was allowing enough space so that when he did it by himself, he would have time to respond to what I was saying.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So that's how he worked.
Yeah.
And I had a good time. We had a good time. And work sessions were intense and and it was serious business, but we had a good time. I won't work with anybody that you can't joke with. I won't. That's my thing. I want to enjoy what I'm doing.
Agreed. Yeah. Mary, how about you? Episode 211, your first viewing of it and then subsequent viewings of it and how your perception changed.
I began to watch the show in the spring of 1968, and it was the Frankenstein storyline. I did not see prior to that until many, many years later. It actually was on UHF channels around 1976, 77. And I was in college and I caught some episodes. It was on like 11:30 at night. And at college, I would be working on productions and come home around the time it was on. So I watched some episodes then. And again, they were the Barnabas episodes. But I don't really clearly remember seeing that episode 211 until the New Jersey network. I had heard that they were going to be putting the series on again, starting with Jonathan's entrance into the show. And I do want to add that some people might say, no, in 210, you saw his hand come out of the coffin to grab Willie.
Yeah.
However, that was not Jonathan's hand.
It was Timothy Gordon. Yeah.
Right. They didn't want to pay the full fee for Jonathan to do it. So get someone that they can pay for special business.
Right. And for those who may not know too, Timothy Gordon was also the ghost of Jeremiah Collins. He was always around. They'd have him do a variety of things on the show, but I guess his big thing was Jeremiah's ghost. Yeah.
That was Jeremiah Collins was the ghost the guy who got shot in the chest, but had a bandage on his head.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I never understood that either.
It traveled.
So when I actually saw episode 211 and subsequent Barnabas episodes, I was actually at that time working in the production office at Guiding Light. It was aired at 6:30, so I would just about get home to watch the episode, not necessarily every night, but that special episode, which was just mentioned, where Victoria and Carolyn are in the living room at Collinwood, and Barnabas tells this monologue about this Josette falling off the cliff. And it was so powerful seeing his performance, the tears in his eyes, that I just felt my heart went out to him.
Yeah.
And now, being an adult and watching it, this is an amazing actor. What a talent. Yes, I did notice that was the nervousness. And now I was working in soaps. And at that point, in 1984, we were not doing it the way they had done it during Dark Shadows. They would be stop and go of mistakes. We would say, stop, let's go back, do it again. But I knew at that time, soaps, they couldn't stop. So I certainly saw that. But there was something about the way that the actor blended with the character. Jonathan was very nervous because he didn't feel he had a complete handle on his lines, because he struggled with dyslexia, which he never talked about. He never felt he should share his woes, as I like to say. So he just struggled to do the best he could. Barnabas was hiding his dreadful secret. I'm not who you think I am. I'm really a vampire. So there was something about the character coalescing with Jonathan's performance that really drew you to him. You really felt you wanted to reach out to him, and it just really made the character. So it was really during that time period that I was seeing these reruns on New Jersey Network that Jonathan came on to do a pledge-a-thon. Back in those days, public television, to raise money, would ask the audience to call in on their phone and pledge, say, $40. And for this special evening where Jonathan was in their studio, they had T-shirts if you gave a certain amount of money, a photograph of Jonathan, a certain amount of money. And even at one point, I think he offered, if you pledge $100, I'll even talk to you on the phone. So I was so impressed at that point during the interview on the Jersey Network, because he did 2 performance pieces, but then he also did an interview. He said he was developing a one-man show. So I was enjoying my work at Guiding Light, but I had started work in theater production. I said, I'm going to write him a letter, tell him that I have a theater background and I would really like to work with him if he needed any assistance. I didn't know if he needed any help. I didn't know if he'd even get the letter. And then, much to my delight and surprise, he called me at my home like the next week and said he was most impressed with my letter and he wanted to sit and meet with me and also Will McKinley to discuss his one-man show. And that was the beginning of an incredibly wonderful working relationship. I perhaps because even though I'd been a fan at that point, I was working in television. That gave me a certain sense in his eyes of a professional. So we just had a tremendous professional working relationship with incredible trust between the two of us. I mean, he very quickly picked up that he found me a woman of integrity, and introduced me to close friends of his. And then, as I mentioned, eventually we became official partners in his company, Clunes Associates. And he was a man of his word, a man of integrity. Honesty was very important. And as he has said in interviews over the years that you can still see today, that he never was particularly a fan of horror. He just thought, oh, this isn't evil. Evil is your best friend looking you in the eye and lying to you. Yeah. Deception from the person that you know and care for is the worst evil in the world. Mm-hmm. So we just, but as I say, we just had a tremendous time working together. There was always just a very easy back and forth. I wasn't nervous or intimidated. It was just a real comfortable, enjoyable working relationship.
Now, I've listened to a lot of interviews with him, including one on the DVD or Blu-ray for the documentary. I think he talks about, he says, well, Barnabas isn't good, or if it started going too far in one direction, he'd kind of pull it back in the other direction. And in the hands of another actor, Barnabas could have been just a one-dimensional character, just a killer. But he imbued the character with that sense of sadness, and just really the audience connected with that. I mean, I remember when I was a child watching that, and it was just Barnabas was doing horrible things, but I felt sad. There was a sadness in there. On the other hand, I know some fans were like, he becomes a good guy. He becomes a hero. Not really. He still also would sometimes play the really dark stuff too. He still could be scary. And I think that was part of what was fascinating about Barnabas is he was kind of unpredictable. He was a lot of shades of gray with Barnabas.
Yeah. Plan A was to work it out. Plan B was to kill him.
Yes.
It didn't work out.
Yes. Yeah, I remember somebody said Barnabas was always judge, jury, and executioner. Like if he decided you had to die, he did it. But he also, there was a sympathetic side to him. He was sort of an anti-hero. And it was interesting that the sort of these characters who were the monsters in the show, and I talked a little bit about this with David Selby, sort of became the protagonists of the show. These characters who were the other, the outsiders, the monsters, they became the leads in the show. Now we see this all the time. This is something we see in all of these types of supernatural type shows, but Dark Shadows was groundbreaking in that regard. And it was, Jonathan as Barnabas leading the charge with that. So,
but I do want to add, and Jonathan would be the first to say this as well, it was also the writers.
Yes.
Well, he as an actor could come in and play shades of gray. The writers had to join with that and put it on the page as well. And they just had tremendous, Ron Sproat, one of the first writers on the show, just wrote some of those amazing monologues because he could see what Jonathan could do and bring to it. So they worked hand in hand.
Yeah, definitely.
And Danielle, you also in the first episode of your show, you talked about the other, right? You talked about and how that is so much of the appeal of Dark Shadows. I mean, that's why it has always had a big queer audience. And that's why it's always had a big adolescent audience because, and for me, I discovered it at like the exact moment that adolescence was hitting me, like with both barrels, just like kids had 15 years earlier. And it spoke to me because even though I'm not gay and was, had a good life, had a, nice suburban house and good parents or whatever, I was adopted and I felt very different from everybody else. And I felt disconnected from my peer group, and I felt like Dark Shadows was a bit of a refuge for me. And then the fan community became my friend group. I was 14 and 15 years old, and all of my friends were in their 20s, and they were all Dark Shadows fans.
Yes.
Right? I didn't have a single friend my own age. And my parents were like a little worried about me, but that's what connected to me, that otherness.
Mm-hmm. And this is a recurring thing I hear from so many people, and myself included. I think Dark Shadows did speak to those of us who did feel kind of a little different or outsiders. In some
I was disconnected with my peers as well. So it was part of the appeal. Absolutely. Will hit it right on the head.
Yeah, definitely. Now, you each worked closely with Jonathan, both individually, and sometimes you'd come together as a group, I imagine, to work with him. I guess just kind of going around, what were your approaches to working with Jonathan? Like, did you have any sort of way of working with Jonathan? Did you adapt to his style of doing things, et cetera?
Well, for me, Jonathan seemed to like and encourage my, youthful bravado. I was I was a mess as a teenager, but I also was extremely confident it was a bizarre combination, right? And I remember one time I was over his apartment, and this is 1984, before we even started on the one-man shows. And my first job for him had been for the very first Manhattan Chavs convention in New York City in 1983. We did these big scrapbooks of all of his memorabilia. And there was a big debut of these scrapbooks. And so my job was to prep all of his stuff, he gave me 20 or 25 giant accordion folders of memorabilia and letters and photos and all this. And I had to organize it. And I remember my parents drove in from Long Island to drive me home with all these accordion folders. And my mother was like, Mr. Frid, would you explain to me how you can get him to do these things for you for free? Because I can't get him to do a damn thing. So, I basically was pretty much with my attitude with Jonathan was like, whatever you got, I'll do. And then when New Jersey Network picked up the show, I was over there and he said, they want me to shoot some promos, some like pledge spots to get people to send money. Take a look at these scripts. What do you think? And I looked at them and I was like, I could do better than that. And he's like, okay, go home and do better than that and come back tomorrow. And so I did. And he was like, good job. We're going to use them.
Oh my God. Did you write the one with the coffee mug where he goes and about to take a sip and he goes, this is coffee, by the way.
Yes, I did.
Oh, yay. That's my favorite one.
Thank you. It only took 35 years, but I finally got a fan from my scripts. But and I was like, it never occurred to me that this would be a strange thing at 15 to say to somebody, let me write, but I did it. And and I remember like we were rehearsing them and I said, you should wink after you say that line. And he was like, I'm not going to wink. And of course he winked. And it's like, not only was I writing for him, I was also like giving him, and I was a teenager. It was very strange. It was a very strange experience.
That's surreal.
It still doesn't even feel real in a weird way, like 35 years later,
How about you, Nancy?
One thing, and it only just occurred to me now, 35 years later, when the three of us were doing our own thing with Jonathan, there wasn't any, he pays to me more attention than you, or I want him to like mine, but not yours. There wasn't any conflict like that. There wasn't any ego where it was, as a group, we were all on a team, and it really only just occurred to me, we didn't fight.
No, never.
Didn't argue. There wasn't any of that. It's just like, and I remember saying one time, I was really into this idea that I had for a story, and Mary came up with a better idea. And I was like, I like Mary's idea better. And he later said something to me about that. And he said, well, that must be kind of hard to do. And I said, no, I want what's best for the show. If she's got a better idea, Will's got a better idea, fine. It's what works. So, and my approach with Jonathan was, when I was writing for him, I would bring in all kinds of ideas. And then he would just say, I don't like that one. I don't like that one. This one's okay, blah, blah, blah. So I learned to have a thicker skin because I was super sensitive. I'm still sensitive, but not as really super sensitive back then. So I learned to develop a thicker skin. That it wasn't personal. That just wasn't working for him. And that was our approach. We would talk. Sometimes we would write down ideas. We'd go down to Pete's for lunch or dinner, and an idea would hit us while we were talking, and we'd be writing it down on napkins, things that we would come up with. So we were always sort of talking about the show, making observations and saying, that would work. That's an idea. So that's how our relationship worked. I thought outside the box of things, and he liked dark humor, as did I. So it worked. The gallows humor, that worked better. But, overall as a team, I feel it's really important to say we worked well together. When we were together, and then when we were separate, sometimes we would call up and consult with the other one and say, what do you think about this? I'm not sure. That's how that relationship worked.
And you and Mary?
Thinking back on that year, which was 1986, when we really finalized his first show, one which was called Jonathan Frid's Fools and Fiends. And believe me, we went through many different titles before settling on that one. As we were working with him, it was incredible to the kind of energy, passion that he had, because the schedules were different for each of us. Since I was working on a soap opera during the day from 8 a.m. till 6. I would then work with him in the evenings. I would go over, have a session, late dinner, and then I would head home. But earlier in the day, Nancy was working at night. So she would work with him in daytime hours. And Will, being a high school student in Long Island, would come in on the weekends and work with him. So he was constantly hours and hours between the three of us separately. Totally focused and devoted to creating the show. I mean, when he set his mind to something, he worked really incredibly hard. And one time I had heard him describe himself as lazy. And no, I would completely disagree with that. That year, I saw a man work incredibly hard, hours and hours and hours, and he didn't tire. He was wanting, at this point in his life, because as we all know, he had stepped away from most of any offers for television or film. He had done some theater, some play readings for friends, but he really decided, I'm going to come back into the business on my terms, and it's going to be with a one-man show. And it was the three of us as a team working with him that made it happen. And ultimately, I am a type of person who's, let's move forward. Let's go. Keep moving forward. Jonathan loved to take a script and analyze it, dwell on it, try it. Let me try this way. Let me try that way. And I sometimes would come in and say, this is what we need to accomplish tonight. X, Y, Z. This is what we're doing tonight. And then we got to move forward. And so ultimately, as he kept playing with the script, and of course, also I was contacting authors or their agents to get rights. And sometimes the answer would be no. And then, okay, let's put this story in instead. Finally, I said, we've got a booking. You're going to be performing October 18th, 1986 in Newport, Rhode Island. Lock the script. You got to go. And that finally was, oh, yes. Okay. So I guess I'm the person who really said, let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah. From everything I've heard, the Reader's Theater, he was so passionate about that. He was so happy to be doing that. And I've had people every so often, and just in the classic horror fandom or just friends are like, oh, I can't believe that he never, he could have been the next Christopher Lee or the next Vincent Price. And he was offered roles in the horror genre. He didn't want that. He wanted to do his thing, isn't that the case, Nancy?
Oh, yes. When I was working with him later in the 90s, early 2000s, I would get these calls from people about wanting him to do this movie, that movie.
Yeah.
The Dan Curtis Dark Shadows revival and all that. Mm-hmm. And he just didn't have any interest in it. And he also told me, he said, one reason why I don't want to do these things is I don't ever want to be as famous as I was back then. He never wanted to be that famous again. Of course, it's kind of a dichotomy because in order to get consistent work, you have to be known. Mm-hmm. I mean, I say that, but yet there are people in the theater who are always working, but you'll never know them because they're not famous or not in television.
Right.
So, I mean, there was always that, but no, he had no interest in doing that, being Vincent Price or anything.
Right. And I mean, you see the pictures with him just doing, as I talked about with David Selby too, doing those tours. And it was like the Beatles, being surrounded by thousands of screaming teenagers. And while I'm sure that on some level that must have been really inspiring or impressive to see that, but on the other hand, you have no privacy anymore. And when he went back to Canada, he had a little bit more privacy because Dark Shadows didn't air that much up there, except maybe like on the border, but wasn't too far up in Canada.
But some fans would pay internet services to find him.
Oh, wow.
And they did that. Lots of fans did that. Yes,
no,
they did.
Wow.
Yes, they did.
That is stalkery. Wow. Yeah. that is scary. Wow. Now I've heard you, when you were on the, Collinsport Historical Society podcast, tell some funny stories about Jonathan. I think, Will, you talked about him like spraying you with a hose or something when you showed up at his house, or was that?
It was me. It was me.
It was you. Oh, it was you, Nancy.
Hose.
Yeah. Do you have any funny stories like that about Jonathan? Well, sounds like he was very playful. Yeah.
The hose story. It was very hot. And when I went up, I always asked him if he wanted me to do anything, as I would any elderly person. Mm. And as I did for elderly friends, because I have friends who are much older than myself and younger than myself. So in this case, I would say, can I help you do anything? And we would go out. And I remember my spouse, Kay, and I were out in his front yard, and we were working. And I yelled in the house. I said, Frid, I need water. I said, it's hot. So he came out and he turned the hose on and he said, here's your water. And at that, but the thing is, there were water guns. Yeah. And because his gardener's son had left water guns around. So I had water guns, and we did that several times. We had several water gun fights.
Oh, that sounds fun. Wow.
It was, yeah.
How about you?
He was very gentle, though. Like, he wouldn't full spray you with the hose. He was like, he would spray your feet and the bottom of your legs. He wouldn't go for your face.
Yeah.
I went for the face. So I I didn't play. No.
What about you, Will? Any funny or amusing stories?
Oh, I mean, so many. He was very like you knew Jonathan liked you if he basically was not nice to you. And I mean that in the best way. Like if he was frank with you, I mean, Nancy sort of mentioned this, then you knew that he respected you, right? But so we would argue a lot, and Mary and I would then like leave and walk back to the subway, and she would be like, "Oh, are you okay?" And and I grew up, in a family where everybody yelled at each other, so it was no big deal. But I think one of my favorite stories with him is that in my junior year of high school, we had all started working together, and New Jersey Network wanted him to come out and do the second special. Mary had seen the first one that he did like early 85. The second special, they wanted him to come back, and it was like a rebroadcast, but he was going to be in the studio during the pledge segments, right? So he said, "You want to come?" And I was like, "Sure." And he's like, "Well, they're going to send a limo. So, you got to get into the city and then we'll take the limo down to Trenton, New Jersey." And I went home and I told my parents, "I'm going to go be on TV with Jonathan Frid." And they're like, "No, you're not. It's a school night." And I was like, "Wait, what?" So I called Jonathan and he was like, "Tell them that." And it was not just a school night. It was like my Spanish final exam.
Okay.
And my parents are like, "You're crazy. You have a final that next day." And he was like, "Tell your parents that we'll study in the limo." So they went for it, like much to my surprise. And so like I brought my Spanish textbook and he's like, "All right, we have like an hour and a half drive. We're going to study the whole way down and the whole way back." And
he knew Spanish.
Yeah, he knew Spanish. He knew Spanish very well. Mm-hmm. So we got to the special and I was on the phone bank. And at one point in the show, he came over and he was like, I was talking to somebody pledging and he was like, "And this is William McKinley. And he's a brilliant student."
Yes.
And I was like, "Is he talking about me?" And he was like, "And he came all the way down to New Jersey and he has a final exam tomorrow." And then like 30 years later, I was at a convention and someone came up to me and was like, "How did you do on that final?"
I was about to ask if you passed.
And the fact is that I did better on that final than I did on any other test that year because I was like so prepped because I wanted to show my parents I can do it. I can go work and also, whatever, be a student. So, but he was like, he was very cool. He was very supportive. Yeah. He like loved to encourage young people and give them opportunities. And just a really good guy to work for.
Great. And Mary, any funny stories?
The first that comes to mind is when we were at Helen Samaris's house in Long Island. It was a party and they had a beautiful pool in her backyard and we were all taking turns swimming and there was a water raft and I was trying to get on it. And Jonathan, who was standing at the side, said I was doing it all wrong. And we were all kind of laughing. And so he said, "I'll show you how to get on it." And he said, "You lean forward." And he does. But as he gets on the raft, it starts to pull down his swim trunks. Oh. So he ruined us all. But it was a very fun day. He really enjoyed being with us. It's just, yes, we'd been fans, but he just enjoyed being with us and laughing. He had a great sense of humor. But sort of the twist about that particular party was that very sadly, Helen has sister Angela, who'd been diagnosed with an inoperable tumor, and she was dying. And it was his idea, let's have something fun for the family. We'll come over, we'll have a big barbecue party. And Nancy, we were all called about, okay, what can we do? We'll bring and coordinate and just have a fun time to give Helen and Angela a wonderful time together. And he was just such a compassionate man. Yeah. That is expressed, of course, in the documentary as well. He really took an interest in the other person. And if you were having troubles, he was there to listen or provide advice. But it's so often it was just, he was not only a great storyteller, he was a wonderful listener.
And he was a good friend. He was.
Yeah, and even though I said,
yeah.
And even though I was like, I tried to keep the line between, the fan line, I tried to keep that intact. He was also very, like, he came to my high school graduation party in my parents' backyard. It's like, he did not have to do that.
Right. Yeah. He came to my 40th, came down from Canada for my 40th birthday party.
That's really, and it's, you hear from the cast on Dark Shadows too. They all speak very fondly of Jonathan and how he cared about people. He was a kind person. He was a kind man. So thank you all for sharing your
You're welcome. Thank you for having us, Penny.
Oh my goodness, my pleasure. Now, before we move on here, we have a special presentation. This is a very exciting presentation. I want to thank you for sharing this with me, Mary. And I believe Will is the one who acquired this. This is a never before heard performance by Jonathan Frid, performing Dead Call by the author William F. Nolan. A great story and a great performance by Jonathan Frid. And you're going to hear it here first, folks, on Terror at Collinwood. So thank you so much for sharing this, Mary. Would somebody put this into, either you, Mary, or Will, tell us about this, put this into context for us?
Well, I found this, I remember I found this story, I would just sit and, pour through books, and I found this story and I read it. And Nancy had mentioned earlier that he had a dark sense of humor, and that, he liked to do, even though he didn't like the identification as the monster or the vampire or whatever, he did have a sort of dark sensibility. And I was like, he's going to love this, because I won't spoil it, but it ends very darkly.
Yeah.
And and I pitched it to him and he loved it, and it became a core part of the show. And then, strangely enough, I loved it so much that I ended up adapting it for my thesis film for NYU Film School.
Oh,
and
wow.
Jonathan was in attendance at the premiere of the film, and Nancy has a small role in my film. And
wow.
Nancy's spouse, Kay, our good old friend Kay, did the movie poster for it. So,
wow.
So it became sort of like and Mary was at the screening as well. So it became like a sort of Clunes Associates, reunion a couple of years later. So, it's a great story, spooky, and I think you guys will love it.
Yeah.
If your listeners will love it.
Well, I would just want to tell you that William F. Nolan actually saw Jonathan perform it when he was in Los Angeles. And he wrote a lovely note to Jonathan about how thrilled he was to see this rendition that Jonathan did. He just absolutely was totally on point and really pleased by it. And I actually had the opportunity to see William F. Nolan in 2016. I was interviewed for the Dan Curtis doc. That same day, they were interviewing William F. Nolan. And I went up to him and I introduced myself. I said, "You're not going to probably remember my name, but I worked with Jonathan and you wrote that lovely letter." And he said, "I remember. I got those royalty checks." And because of course it was copyrighted material, and when I called the authors, sometimes they would ask for a small fee. Because obviously we weren't for profit. We were just a struggling little theater company. And so it's funny thing that they would remember that. But shortly before his death, I had contacted him because I was working on the documentary and asked for permission to use it in the documentary and potentially promotionally. And he was 100% for it. Because he just thought Jonathan had done such a lovely job. And this particular recording was when Jonathan began to experiment with putting music and sound effects into the show. So this actually does have some music and sound effects in it, which is unlike earlier recordings when we first were doing his one-man shows. He was always recording in his apartment because in a way he was his own director. So he would record on his video camera and then watch these just to try to improve himself. They were never particularly good quality, but this was really a truly, professionally quality recording because we were working with music and sound effects.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing this. And folks, stick around because you definitely do not want to miss this. It's fantastic. Thank you again to my guests for joining me for this episode of Terror at Collinwood, this special celebration of Jonathan Frid's first appearance as Barnabas Collins 55 years ago. If all goes according to plan, this will be posted on April 18th, 2022. And thank you so much for listening. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast. Please remember to share the podcast, tell your friends, spread it like the dream curse so that everyone can find out about it. and thank you.
Danielle, I want to thank you for shining a light on the early fandom days, because it's not, it's such an important part of Dark Shadows history that is not really discussed or not even known by a lot of the current people. And we carried the torch, when there was nothing out there. So thanks for sharing those stories.
Oh my goodness.
You, Danielle.
Oh,
Thank you.
Absolutely my pleasure, and I'm honored to do that, because the Dark Shadows fandom wouldn't be where it is today if it wasn't for everything that has created the foundation for the fandom, the festivals, and just the camaraderie, the fanzines. I subscribed to all those zines back in the 80s and the 90s, and they were great. And I had Kathy Rush on, and she really dove deep into the origins. It was so fascinating. So
she's incredible. We owe a lot to her. Owe a lot to her and Marcy Robbins.
Yeah, I got to get Marcy on here at some point too. I'd love to chat with her.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Grand Central Partnership is pleased to present Jonathan Frid.
Len had been dead a month when the phone rang. Midnight, cold in the house, and me dragged up from sleep to answer the call. Helen gone for the weekend, me alone in the house, and the phone ringing. Hello? Hello, Frank. Who's this? You know me. It's Len. Old Len Stiles. Cold, deep and intense. The receiver dead cold metal in my hand. Leonard Stiles died 4 weeks ago. 4 weeks, 3 days, 2 hours, and 27 minutes, to be exact. I want to know who you are. Chuckle. That same dry chuckle I'd heard so many times. Come on, old buddy, after 20 years. Hell, you know me. This is a damn poor joke. No joke, Frank. You're there alive, and I'm here dead. And you know something, old buddy? I'm really glad I did it. Did what? Killed myself. Because death is just what I hoped it would be. Beautiful, gray, quiet. No pressures. Len Stiles' death was an accident, a concrete freeway barrier. I aimed my car for that barrier, pedal to the floor, doing almost 100 when I hit. No accident, Frank. I wanted to be dead. No regrets. Well, I tried to laugh, make light of this, matching his chuckle with my own. Dead men don't use telephones. Think of this phone as a medium, a line of force through which I can bridge the gap between us. Hell, you gotta admit it beats holding hands around a table in the dark. Yet the principle's the same. I still don't. Naturally, you're skeptical. I expected you to be, but listen carefully to me, Frank. And I listened, Perhaps the voice told me things that only Len could know. Intimate details of shared experiences extending back through 2 decades. And when he'd finished, I was certain of one thing. He was Len Stiles. All right, I don't believe in ghosts. Don't pretend to understand any of this, but I'll accept it. I must accept it. I'm glad, Frank, because it's important that we talk. I know how lousy things have been, old buddy. What do you mean? I just know how things are going for you, and I want to help. As your friend, I want you to know that I understand. Well, really not you've been feeling bad now, haven't you? Kind of down, right? Yeah, a little, I guess. And I don't blame you. You got reasons, lots of reasons. For one, there's your money problem. I'm expecting a raise. Cooney promised me one within the next few weeks. You won't get it, Frank, I know. He's lying to you. Cooney's planning to fire you. He never did like me. We never got along from the day I walked into his office. And your wife. All the arguments you've been having lately. It's a pattern, Frank. Your marriage is all over. Helen's going to ask for a divorce. She's in love with another man. Who, damn it? What's his name? You don't know him, wouldn't change things if you did. There's nothing you can do about it now. Helen just doesn't love you anymore. These things happen to people. We've been drifting apart for the last year, but I didn't know why. I had no idea that she... And then there's Jan. She's back on it, Frank. Only it's worse now. A lot worse. I knew what he meant. The coldness raked along my body. See, Jan's 19, my oldest daughter, and she's been into drugs for the past 3 years, but she promised to quit. What do you know about Jan? Tell me. She's into the heavy stuff, Frank. She's hooked bad. It's too late for her. What the hell are you saying? I'm saying she's lost to you. She's rejected you, and there's no reaching her. She hates you, blames you for everything. Well, I won't accept that kind of blame. I did my best for her. It wasn't enough, Frank. We both know that. You'll never see Jan again. Blackness was welling within me, but a choking wave through my body. Listen to me, old buddy. Things are going to get worse, not better. I know. I went through my own kind of hell when I was alive. Well, I'll start over. I'll leave the city, go east, work with my brother in New York. Your brother doesn't want you in his life. You'll be an intruder, an alien. He never writes you, does he? No, but that doesn't mean not even a card last Christmas. No letters or calls. He doesn't want you with him, Frank. Believe me. And then he began to tell me other things. He began to talk about middle age and how it was too late now to make any kind of new beginning. He spoke of disease, loneliness, rejection, and despair, and the blackness was complete. There's only one real solution to things, Frank. Just one. That gun you keep in your desk upstairs. Use it, Frank. Use the gun. I couldn't do that. Why not? What other choice have I got? The solution is there. Go upstairs. stairs and use the gun. I'll be waiting for you afterwards. You won't be alone. It'll be like the old days. We'll be together. Death is beautiful. Use the gun, Frank. The gun. Use the gun. The gun. The gun. I've been dead for a month now, and Len was right. It's fine here. No pressures, no worries. Gray and quiet and beautiful. I know how lousy things have been going for you. They won't get any better. Isn't that your phone ringing? You better answer it, because it's important that we talk.
Absolutely incredible. Oh, that voice, let me tell you, wow. Thank you so much to Mary O'Leary for helping to make this episode happen. She connected me with David Selby and reached out to Will, and also provided this magnificent performance from Jonathan Frid. So, Mary, thank you very much for helping out so much with this celebration of the 55th anniversary of Jonathan Frid's first appearance as the legendary Barnabas Collins. And just real quick, Dead Call was written by author William F. Nolan, and it featured music by David Christenberry / Rave Dave 60 Music. Mary had permission to use this performance, and be sure to pick up Dark Shadows and Beyond, the Jonathan Frid story. If you have not watched it yet, you can get it on Amazon. It is available at many, many places. I'll put a link to the Amazon page for it in the show notes. And just a quick copyright disclaimer with regard to the performance. Copyright disclaimer: under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, commenting, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
And for as long as they lived, the dark shadows never truly dissipated, for there will always be terror at Collinwood. Terror at Collinwood is a Penny Dreadful production.
This episode of Terror at Collinwood is dedicated to the memory of Kay Fry. Nancy Kersey mentions her spouse Kay during this episode, and Kay has passed away. My deepest sympathies to Nancy and to Kay's family and friends.